A promise was made, the prophets of old. From David's throne, a Savior foretold. The Word became flesh, God's only Son. Light of the world, the righteous one.
So now we are going to begin looking at the doctrine of God. Right, the doctrine of who God is. Or at least that's where we're going to get to. If you'll remember, whenever we were discussing, that is not the right place to click. Whenever we were doing our Bible fast forward, we said that there are 5 main pieces to the Christian worldview puzzle, to the Christianity. Those being God, man, sin, Christ, and resurrection. Resurrection being in the end days, the final resurrection, not Christ's resurrection. And so what I figure we would now do is we're going to walk through and take a look at each of those 5 and just the doctrines that we believe, that we embrace as followers of Christ, of what those represent, what those teachings entail. And so, of course, we'll start off first with God, right? He's the biggest, He's the most, He's the top, so we'll start with God. However, before we dive into the doctrine of God, we're going to go through kind of to look at an issue that it's kind of bizarre to me that it's even an issue, but in our world today it seems to be one. We're going to look at, does God even exist? Right? The people will question, does God exist? And is God really out there? Lord, are you there? And so I want us, before we dive into the attributes of His holiness and His omniscience and His omnipotence and what all that means, let's just actually look at the evidence and the argument for whether or not God is actually there, because that seems to be under so much attack from certain areas in our world. Now we're going to have... I'm going to move this because bending over like that is going to get very annoying very fast. So bear with me a second. There we go. Remember, we had some information before whenever we were doing a study that I got from called True You. It's a project by Focus on the Family. That's where we got all that archaeological and historical evidence from. Well, I'm using some information from a different study that they have that's called Does God Exist? And so that's what we're going to be going through. It's what we're going to be looking at. And so what we're going to do as we examine this idea of God existing is we're going to have basically 3 tools we're going to be using: evidence, logic, and reason. And there's people who automatically go, wait a minute, there's no evidence for God. How do you know God exists? Where's the evidence? There is none. And I guess joke's on them, because there actually is. And so that's what we will be doing, right? We all know that there seems to be something more, right? We know that this can't be all it is, and it's not just kind of a hope or wishful thinking. It's like intuitive, we feel it in our bones kind of a thing, that we believe there is more than this life, this day-to-day routine, get up, do our thing, go to sleep. Get up, do our thing, go to sleep. Over and over and over again for 70, 80, 90 years. Surely there is more meaning to life than that. Right? Because when I struggle with this, it's like, okay, I might enjoy this now, but 100 years from now, what is it really going to mean? Well, what does our lives really add up to? What is the significance? What is the purpose? And these are things that people struggle with. Deep struggles about these issues. Philosophers wrestle with these things. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, he said, without an infinite reference point, nothing finite has a lasting meaning. Infinite meaning without end. Finite, that would be us. We're born, we die. And if that's all there is, it has no real significant lasting meaning. And for a lot of people, that causes some real deep problems. That causes some serious wrestling issues about why bother? Why am I here? What is the point? Some people don't really care. Some people have become comfortably numb to the idea of, oh, well, this is all there is. But I really think that deep down, we all do have this idea that there is more than just this day-to-day seeking after some happiness. C.S. Lewis said that if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. And we all know there are desires and wants and things that we feel urges for that can be met in this world. Everything that we desire has a corresponding way to meet it. You're hungry, there's food. You're thirsty, there's water. Right? Need companionship, there's people. Right? Whatever the desire is, there's something in this world to meet it. Our desires exist because we're lacking something. And so if we have a desire that we look around this world and there is nothing in this world that can satisfy it, that means we're lacking something that's out of this world. Something outside of this world. And so we get the question, does God exist? And what I'm going to do through over the next maybe, 8 to 10 weeks is what we'll take going through this. The overall Doctrine of God kind of section might take us about 8 to 10 months, because we're going to go through, does God exist? And then we're going to go over his attributes, his holiness, his omnipotence, his omniscience, the Holy Spirit, Trinity. We're going to go over all of that. So, get comfortable. This isn't going to be just a quick here, write it down and learn it. We're going to go through all this in as much depth as we can. So as we go through this about does God exist, I'm going to make a case. I want to put forth an argument. We're going to go through some evidence. I'm going to build a case that says this is why you should believe that God exists. And rather than me just standing here preaching, rather than me just standing here saying, here's what you should believe, I'm going to make the case. I'm going to lay out the evidence and let you decide for yourself as if you actually have some kind of thought in your head, and that I expect you as an adult and rational human being to, use some reason or rationale on your own. And so we are going to engage with this information. We're going to talk about it. Hopefully, as long as I don't get rambling too fast, I'll stop and ask questions. If you have a question, flag me down, throw something at me to get my attention, whatever it takes. I want there to be discussion. I don't want this to just be, I'll sit there and go, yeah, okay, right? I really want it to engage. I really want it to be something where we have a dialogue on this, about the information as we cover it. Because what we're going to do is lay out reasons for our faith. Why do we have faith in God? There are reasons for faith. And if we're going to say that there is reason for faith, one of the things we have to ask is, what is faith? So whenever you hear the word faith, what is the definition? What is the connotation that comes to your mind? What does it mean when you hear the word faith? This is the interactive portion of the program. When you hope for something you can't see? Okay. Belief in something you can't see? Okay. Anything else? Right. That is probably the most common one, is that it is belief in something, like there's an uncertainty, but I'm going ahead and believe it or trust it anyway, right? That kind of idea. Certainly now as election time is fast approaching, there's a lot of faith that their candidate is going to win. Maybe there's not much faith, just a blind hope, maybe, please Lord, right? And so there definitely is that meaning, but there's multiple meanings of the word faith. Right? I'm not really wanting to say there's a right or wrong answer in, what is faith, but there's multiple meanings, multiple uses of the word. The first one is belief in something that's uncertain, right? Just like what you said. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to choose to believe it. Right? There is that. But we also have belief in presuppositions, right? There's things that you can't know, you can't prove. There's no way you could test it, there's no way you could know it, but it is reasonable to assume. Right? So some basic assumptions you might make about the world. These are things like scientists. Everybody loves to say, especially skeptics, well, science deals in facts, religion is just faith. Right? They're meaning that first definition in what you're uncertain of. Well, there's all sorts of things that scientists are uncertain of, but they take on faith. Presuppositions, things like uniformity in nature, that things are going to keep happening the way they've always happened, that the laws of nature are going to function tomorrow like they do today. Well, they don't really know that for certain. They can't know that for certain. But it's a reasonable assumption, so they assume it. Or things like inferences. Whenever they have this data and they draw a conclusion, well, they don't really know for sure that that conclusion is right, but it makes the best sense given what they know. That's a presupposition. That all events have causes, right? That it seems kind of weird that you would think that they don't, but you can't prove they do. So that's a presupposition. But that's on faith. That's something you're not certain of. You can't know, but it seems reasonable, so you're going to take it on faith. The laws of nature being constant, right? If you've studied any science whatsoever, speed of light, does it change? No. 186,000 miles per second. Speed of light's constant. Well, how do they know it's constant? Well, because they've never seen it go a different speed. Well, does that mean it can't? Does that mean there's not somewhere in the universe where it's not going a different speed? Well, it seems very unlikely, but they don't really know it. It's just based on observation and what they have. They make the assumption that that is the case. So it's kind of that same thing. There's an uncertainty, but they're going to take it on faith. There's also this idea of trust or belief in God's presence or God's power, right? That I have faith that God's going to comfort me, right? We just prayed for some people who are in need, and we have faith He's going to comfort. We have faith that His presence will be in those situations, right? So you have this personal kind of faith going on. But then you have belief in a system of thought or a personal philosophy, right? What's called a worldview. Like you might talk about, the Christian faith, which would be to believe this body of things, beliefs, doctrines that we call Christianity. That would be faith, a religious faith. And then so that's what we're going to be focusing on through this. The idea of faith as a system of belief, faith as a worldview, right? Are you familiar with that word, worldview? Have y'all encountered that? Probably not much. I mean, it's not the kind of thing you like reading the funny pages or something. Right? I think the older term that people would use was paradigm. And so basically a worldview, it's your personal philosophy. Right? It is a hypothesis about reality, about kind of the way the world is. It is the lens through which you view all of the world around you. Okay? It is the way that you answer certain fundamental questions. And a worldview is going to answer these questions like, what is the ultimate nature of reality? Right? Well, what is the prime thing that is the definition of reality? What is the nature of humanity? Do we have free will, or are we determined? Are we essentially good people, or are we basically selfish? Right? That your worldview are what answers these questions, however you view these things or how you view the world. Or the nature of the world around us, that sort of thing. Is it only material? Are there spiritual things? That sort of deal. And so what you view about the world is going to affect everything else. Now, what we're going to focus on as we kind of look at this, does God exist, is really that first question. What is the nature of ultimate reality? Or to put it another way, what is the thing from which everything else comes? Right, well, what is what you could call the prime reality, the top, the prime, the most, or I guess bottom, basic, foundational factor of reality. And we're going to look at four main ways that gets answered, one of which being God, and then we're going to go through and look at the evidence of nature around us and see which one of those actually fits and matches and makes the most sense. Any questions about any of that so far before we launch in? Is that kind of making sense? Okay. Well, there's one way of thinking, materialists. These are people who believe in matter. They believe that only material things exist, or energy. If you're into physics, you know that matter and energy are basically interchangeable. So they would say that matter and energy are the thing from which everything else comes. That the universe maybe is eternal, or they'll say there's a multiverse. There's some multiverse generator that's just kicking out universes and we happen to live in one of them. Or maybe matter and energy and the laws of nature that act upon them cause everything else. And so it's a question about what's the main thing, the foundational thing in life. And they say, well, it's just matter. That's all it is. Just matter. There's no spiritual, no supernatural. It's just matter. Here's little diagrams that we'll kind of use. If you look there, the circle, the big circle, is the universe. It's all of reality, everything that exists. The pendulum there swings back and forth. That represents the laws of nature. And then inside there you have everything else that exists. There's the mountains and trees and the stars and planets and people and animal there. And materialists say that that's all there is. Just that. That big G over there, that represents God. They say, no, there's not one of those. The only thing that's real is the physical world. That's what materialists say. That's one of the ideas we'll be evaluating. Another one, theism, is, I think, where we would fall, I hope. Otherwise, you haven't been paying attention. That's that idea that you have all of reality, but then you do have God. But in theism, not only is it just that there is a God, but you see, God created the world. There's that arrow. But then he upholds the world. Right? So the Bible teaches that he upholds all of the universe. And then he also enters into the world, performing miracles, or the greatest miracle of Christ coming in the form of a man. And so this would be theism, that God creates the world, upholds the world, and acts in it. Then you have deism. It's kind of a little spin on theism. They believe there's a God. They believe he created the world. Then he left it alone. He doesn't uphold it. He just created it and turned it loose. He doesn't enter in and interfere. There's no miracles. It's just God created it, and then he kind of stands off remotely, not bothering us. Okay? Then you have this fourth one that doesn't really get a lot of attention in our culture, though probably should. New Age kind of thinking, go back a few decades, this was really popular. It's called pantheism. It's this idea that God exists, but he is part of the world, or rather the world is God. That God is not a personal, intellectual mind, not a rational being. Think of the Force in Star Wars. It's just this impersonal energy force out there that holds everything together and makes up everything, and so that we're all part of God. I'm God, you're God, the pews are God, this podium is God, the TV is God. It's all part of God. And like in Buddhism, for example, which is pantheistic, whenever you attain nirvana, but Buddhists, they're working to try to be good little Buddhists so that one day they can attain nirvana and they get reincarnated until they get it right. And whenever they attain that highest order, what happens to them? They cease to exist. They're basically reabsorbed back into the whatever it is that God is. Right? That's pantheism. And so what we're going to be doing is kind of taking a look at these four ideas as we look at the evidence of nature, of experience, and different things around us. So you have materialism, where matter is the prime reality. Theism, where a personal God is the prime reality. Deism, where there is a God, but he's not personal. Pantheism, where there is an impersonal God who is the prime reality. So if we're talking about this prime reality, right, that's just a philosophical thing, the thing that defines and from which everything else comes. Well, we're Christians, we're theists. We believe that prime reality is God. So we're just going to reform that question to say, hey, does God exist? Right? What is the prime reality? Well, we're really interested in, does God exist? Is it what we think it is? Is it theism? And so what we're going to do now, if we're going to try to answer that question, how are we going to go about answering it? I already said we're going to give reason for faith. We defined faith. So what is reason? Well, there's a few different types of reason. If you think back last year, we kind of did a little quick crash course in logic, and I mentioned some of these. You have deductive reasoning, which is you take a general rule and you apply it to a specific instance to draw a conclusion. So the classic one that if you took an intro to philosophy or logic class, well, you're going to hear this. It is, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is immortal. He is, that he is not immortal, that he is mortal. Right? Socrates is a man, so therefore Socrates is mortal. It naturally follows. If you have this general principle, and this one fits the criteria, then that is the answer. That's deductive reasoning. Then you have inductive reasoning. It's where you take specific observations and draw a general rule. So, for instance, Gravity. Do I have anything here I can give an example with? I have anything to see that. It's a little flash drive. Right? If I drop that, what happens? It falls. If I hold it, nothing happens. If I let go, it falls. Every time. Over and over again. Over and over again. Keeps happening. So, hey, I can draw this conclusion. Let's think this thing called gravity. And if you have an object that is not being restrained, it'll fall. So that is, you take the specific instance of, I observe things falling, and you draw the general conclusion that an unrestrained object falls. That's inductive. That's the scientific method, by the way. I mean, that is what scientists attempt to do, is they take these observations and draw general principles from them. But then we have what's called abductive. That's whenever you look at an effect, you look at a clue, you look at some phenomenon, and you're trying to figure out, okay, what caused that, right? For instance, if you were to hop in a spaceship and go up to the moon, and you see that, what caused that? You see what that is? It's a boot print. What caused that? An astronaut. How do you know? NBC News. There you go. Right? Because who else is going to have a boot on the moon? It's going to be an astronaut, right? I mean, that's one of those, it's basic, it's simple. There's the effect. Hey, what causes that? You reason back and you figure, somebody's foot in a boot stepped in the dirt on the moon. That's what causes that. However, things aren't always that clear cut, right? So what if we were to say, you step outside and the street's wet. Now here's what we know. If it rains, the street's going to be wet. So you step outside and you see a wet street. What does that mean?
You got a wet street.
It means you got a wet street. How did the street get wet?
Exterior ways.
Be all kinds of. Does it mean it rained? It could have rained.
A water leak and
right. Yeah, could have.
Fire hydrant.
Yeah, fire hydrant leaking.
Truck coming along with water spraying.
Yeah, neighborhood kids having a water balloon fight, something. I mean, there's all sorts of things it could be, right? And so, how do you know which one? Well, you're going to need some more information, aren't you? Right? Let's say that it was neighborhood kids having a water balloon fight. Well, what do you expect to see? Little pieces of water balloon, right? Let's say rain. Okay, did rain make the street wet? What do you expect to see?
Sidewalk and porch and grass.
Everything else is wet, right? You're going to take other evidence and see which possible way could have caused this. And this is how we reason. And this is how we go through our days. It just happens. It's intuitive for us. But we're actually going to apply a little bit more formulaic purpose reason to it. Here's what happens. It's called the multiple competing hypothesis. You have an effect, and then you say, okay, here's these multiple causes it could have been. Which one actually makes the most sense? Which one fits the best? And this is where kind of a little bit of a twist on the abduction reasoning, where it's called the inference to the best explanation. Right? Okay. So we have we have this effect. We have multiple possible explanations. So which one makes the most sense? And this is actually a reasoning tool that we're going to use. Which one best explains what we see? This is a common form of reasoning used by scientists, used by attorneys, used by detectives, used by philosophers. Anyone ever serve on a jury? Right? You use this method of reasoning because you had a prosecutor and you had a defense attorney both telling you what you need to believe based on this evidence, and you had to go, okay, which one of these makes most sense? Right? This is what you were doing. And by the way, I just have to say this because it's a little pet peeve of mine. Even though scientists might use this method, it is not the scientific method. I've had people tell me before, you don't understand science. I said, well, no, I do. It's just, that doesn't necessarily mean what you're saying. Well, that's the scientific method. No, the scientific method is test and observation and measure and repeat. That's the scientific method. Just because a scientist happens to use inference to the best explanation doesn't mean inference to the best explanation is the scientific method. I've had people tell me that. And I say, okay, well, are detectives and defense attorneys scientists? Because they're using the exact same thing, and by that definition, they would be. So, Sorry, there's a little soapbox. So, what makes an explanation the best explanation? Right? Well, it's going to be the explanation that provides the most causal power, right? The thing that has the most causal explanation. You can say, okay, well, which one of these possible explanations could actually cause what I see in front of me? And so, it's kind of like in court. Well, what's the standard if you're on a jury? What's the standard that you have to meet? That you have to be absolutely certain they didn't do it. No? What's the standard? Beyond a reasonable doubt. Right? Because there's always something. I mean, you can come up with all kinds of weird ways why it couldn't be, but there's a point where the evidence stacks up to a certain degree to where you have to say, okay, this one is the most reasonable explanation. He did it. Right? And so maybe we could think of some way out there kind of idea of how he didn't do it, but really the evidence points to he did it. And so that's what we're looking at here. We're looking for the explanation that builds up to that point of beyond reasonable doubt where that is the one you should believe. It's the one that makes the most sense based on what we see in front of us. And so what we're going to do, we have our 4 worldviews, and these are very general categories, by the way. Just a little side note. I've had someone before make the challenge of how can you know Christianity is the correct religion? Have you studied every religion out there? How do you know that one of those thousands of other religions you've never studied isn't really the right one? Well, because all the religions of the world can fit into broad categories. And if the broad category is found to be wrong, all the religions that fall into that category are wrong. Okay, so if we determine that pantheism can't be the answer, well, that's going to eliminate Hinduism and Buddhism and all sorts of Eastern religions. Just take them off the list. We don't have to go and study each and every one of those particular religions, right? And so we're going to have these 4. And each of these 4, these are like the broadest categories you can kind of get. There might be a few others out there, but these are the 4 big ones that you'll encounter in life. So each of these invoke a different cause, right? They each have a different prime reality, a different main thing, foundational thing from which everything else comes. And if that cause can adequately explain the evidence, then you should give that view some consideration. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to say, okay, here are 4 views. What is the prime reality? What is the thing from which all other things come? Is it an impersonal, uninvolved God, deism? Is it naturalism? Is it matter and energy itself and there is no supernatural? Is it pantheism where God is part of everything and everything is part of God? Or is it theism? A personal, rational creator being who is involved in his creation. Which one is going to make the sense of the evidence? And the evidence we're going to be looking at as we go forward over the next few weeks is going to be from cosmology, from biology, from physics. We're actually going to take some scientific evidence and lay it out there and go, okay, here's what science is telling us. What makes more sense, God or not God? And then we're going to see that I claim, and I hope you will find out too, that the evidence actually backs up God. Now, interestingly, this study, we're going to spend the next maybe 8 to 10 weeks going over, will not get you to the God of the Bible. Theism just means a personal, rational, intelligent creator being. Okay? That's Christianity, that's Judaism, that's Islam, any monotheistic religion that has this idea of God would fall into this category. But then that's what we're going to do as we go forward and look at the doctrine of God. Look at what is God like. We'll actually uncover how you can know that, okay, there is a God, but how do we know it's the God of the Bible? Well, that's what we'll get into in the months to come after this part of the study. However, I think there's a pretty strong case that theism is going to come out on top. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd go find a different job. But I do believe that, and I think that case will be made. So, any questions? Let's laid out what we're doing and where we're going. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, criticisms? What's that? Interesting?
Sounds exciting.
Yeah. And so, all righty. Well, y'all are easy.
About 4 or 5 slides ago, you showed the world with people and what was the swinging thing?
The pendulum represents the laws of nature.
Oh, laws.
Yeah. And so,
You came in.
Right.
yeah.
And just make sure you go look at the video.
Yeah. Yeah.
The beginning of it.
So, all right. Well, I guess we finish a little quick. Either I talk faster, y'all just weren't asking questions.
Is there a way for me to link onto my Facebook page?
Yes. I will, I don't know if I'll get it done tonight, but definitely tomorrow. I'll make sure it's, anything edited down and everything, and I'll get it uploaded, and I'll post it on the church's Facebook page. And then you can just share from that.
Okay.
So,
I'd like to share it
okay.
every week.
Okay. And I want to say, just to make sure that we are giving proper credit where it is due, right? I said that I'm basing this, and there'll be some other things I'll bring in or, kind of alter, but I'm basing this heavily on the Does God Exist study by it's Focus on the Family, did a project called True You. And the teacher of it, just to give some credit where it is due, Dr. Stephen C. Meyer. He is a PhD from Cambridge. He's a philosopher of science, is really his specific area. He works with the Discovery Institute. They're a big intelligent design think tank. Now, I don't agree with him on everything. He would not agree with me on certain interpretations of the early parts of Genesis. But he is a highly intelligent and just great guy. I mean, if you wanted to look into anything, if you would be curious to see, there's actually the DVD of him teaching this. If you'd be curious to see it from him teaching it, I can lend it to you. But I just want to make sure that I, give credit where it is due, that I'm not completely plagiarizing, that I'm just borrowing. But some good material out there. All right? Is that it? All right, then. Let's pray.
While we were sinners, Christ died for us.